Hello, everybody. It is August 1st, 2026, here in the United States of America. And in today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the situation involving the quasi war, if you want to call it that, between Israel and the United States on one side and Iran on the other. This is just an update on the situation and something I'm going to talk about. It's going to be a fairly short video. I have plenty to do today. But before I get into that, if you enjoy this content, please like this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you already are subscribed, then please check the bell button to make sure that you are still set up to get notifications whenever I do post a new video. So let's get to the topic at hand. It appears now that, and this is according to an X page called Current Report, and I've also seen this in other places as well, that the U.S. and Israel are considering a land blockade of Iran to increase economic pressure on the country after months of war failed to bring Tehran to the table permanently. It did appear several weeks ago that the United States and Iran were about to reach some kind of agreement. Well, those negotiations broke down and things seem to be back to the way they were before the negotiations were taking place, but I would say at a decreased pace compared to what they were. I think the United States is in a position where it realizes the options that it has to bring Iran to the table in a speedy manner are fairly limited. I've talked about this before, but a ground invasion of Iran is really off the table. I don't think it's possible at the moment. It would be very unpopular domestically in the United States, and with the midterm elections coming up, that would be it would surely be something that would hurt the Republican Party very badly for the United States to be involved in yet another fairly unpopular war on the behalf of another country in the Middle East. Also, strikes on Iranian territory don't seem to be lessening pressure on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is still able to effectively control the strait using drones and missiles. And as I've mentioned before, Iran is a very large country, very mountainous, lots of places to hide missile and drone sites. American air power is very potent, don't get me wrong, but I don't think there's a military on the planet that can fully win a war or bring a country to the table through airstrikes alone, especially when that country is a regional middle power like Iran. It might work against a very small, backwards country with a much smaller population and less economic leverage in their pocket, but against Iran, this doesn't appear to be an effective approach, at least from my vantage point. And I think that's why the United States is considering resorting to this. So basically, what the U.S. wants to do is they want to use a land blockade to really put economic pressure on Iran to bring them to the table faster, because the longer this war goes on, the more gas prices continue to rise, the more it hurts countries in the region. Gulf states rely on tourism and oil exports, and well, this kind of puts a damper on both. Iran knows that, and it's trying to use that to the best advantage that it can. It wants to put as much pressure on Gulf countries to try to put pressure on the United States to end their war. They want gas prices to go up quickly because that puts domestic pressure on U.S. politicians to end the war. And as long as they can survive and keep that situation or those sets of circumstances continuing for the next several months, at least in their calculus, they can prevail. That is their strategy. Basically survive and hold on to the straits, drive up oil prices, and put domestic pressure on United States leaders at home, and to put pressure, economic pressure, on Gulf states. But anyways, what the United States and Israel are reportedly considering is to use Iraq, Pakistan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan to restrict Iran's ability to import and export goods. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned in previous videos, this is not a war that the United States can allow to drag on for months at a time. The political ramifications here at home are too great. The economic ramifications for nations in the region and the world as a whole is too great. This has to be concluded, and concluded fairly quickly. And if airstrikes aren't going to bring Iran to the table, they have to find other options. This appears to be one of them. I will give my thoughts on this and whether I think this is a valid strategy and something that could actually work. I think there are some issues here, and I'll explain what they are. So if we look at Iran, that list of countries includes every nation that borders Iran. You have Iraq here, you have Turkey here, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So that would put Iran in a situation where it couldn't import or export really anything except through the Caspian Sea towards Russia. Now, what I think the hope is if Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan are brought into this blockade, if you will, then they'll close the Caspian Sea and refuse to allow Iranian goods to transit to Russia. Well, that creates some problems because Azerbaijan and Russia have just now recently started to mend their diplomatic relations. And then same thing with Turkmenistan. I believe they have a fairly positive relationship with Russia. This would cause a lot of ire with Russia, and they know that. Russia still trades with Iran. It's one of Iran's key allies. They have supplied Iran with weaponry in the past. They trade with Iran. They're one of Iran's, I wouldn't say major trading partners. I'm not really sure how much they actually do trade with Iran, but I'm sure it's a fairly significant amount. But I think one of the issues there is Russia would then immediately put pressure on Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan not to accept this kind of deal. And they have the leverage to do so because they are a very large nation with a fairly substantial military, even if a lot of it is tied up with the war in Ukraine. I think most political realists do understand that Russia actually still has a fair bit of military potential on the table and quite a lot of economic leverage with Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan as well. They are the dominant power in Central Asia. So I'm sure they would take issue with this kind of blockade of Iran. I think that's one of the major reasons why I think it would fail pretty quickly. But would Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan be willing to join this blockade, considering that it would draw the ire of the Russian Federation, which is their very large neighbor to the north? Possibly not. Turkey, on the other hand, I'm not entirely sure what they would do. I know that they have a semi-adversarial relationship with the Iranians. They have been fighting Iranian proxies in the region for quite some time. They might possibly be on board for a deal like this, but their border with Iran is very limited. It's just this small section of border right here. I'm not sure how much of an impact Turkey refusing to trade with Iran would actually have on Iran. Next up is Iraq. I don't think Iraq would go for this. I think people need to keep in mind that the Iraqi government is heavily under the influence of the Iranian government of Tehran. Iraq has a fairly substantial presence of pro-Iran militias. The Iraqi government does not entirely control the country. They do not have a monopoly on force within their borders, and Iran still has quite a bit of influence. So would the Iraqi government be willing to go along with the land blockade, knowing that there'll be direct consequences to face from the Iranians? And would the Iranians actually see something like this as an act of war? Especially considering this country is supposed to be neutral towards Iran, if not, I won't say an outright ally, but they're not really participating in hostilities against Iran like other Gulf states might be. So no, I don't think that Iraq would be up for this idea. Okay, well, let's talk about Afghanistan. And this is something that I want to mention, and this is something that I've always believed. People seemed perplexed and bewildered as to why the Biden administration left so much military hardware behind for the Taliban. And I'll tell you why. They did this because the Taliban does not get along with the government in Iran. I would say they're adversaries, if not outright enemies. They've had issues. They've had border skirmishes. And the reason why the Biden administration, and this wasn't just, this was a calculus. You know, people thought it was incompetence. It wasn't. They wanted to arm the Taliban. They figured, you know what, if we're not going to actively be fighting the Taliban, we can use them to our advantage. We can use money, We can use leverage. We can use our influence to try to use them as a buffer against Iranian influence in the region. And I believe that's what they did. Now, the Taliban, while not a united force, actually, the Taliban is a multitude of different groups all under the banner of the Taliban. Uh, Afghanistan has some issues. There's many regions of the country that don't really have a central authority. Yes, Kabul is the de facto capital of the country, but the Taliban, again, is not a necessarily united force. But they are armed to the teeth. They do have a lot of American weaponry. They do have a lot of American hardware. Many Taliban are longtime veterans of the war against the United States within the country. They know how to fight. They know how to use weaponry. They're probably semi-competent. And I think the goal was to use Afghanistan eventually against Iran in a future conflict with Iran, hoping the Afghanis would be given a bit of an edge with the weaponry that they were left. I do firmly believe that was the calculus, and that is why it was done. And this is where Afghanistan comes into play. Would the Afghan government go along, and would it even have enough sway and control over the whole country to get the entirety of Afghanistan to go along with a land blockade against Iran on behalf of the United States and Israel? Well, this is the problem. The United States just spent 20 years fighting the Taliban. They're no friends of Israel either. So would they do something at the behest of Israel and the United States unless there, wasn't something really in it for the Taliban? Now, the United States, from what I understand, still controls quite a bit of assets that were supposed to go to the Taliban. Money from the Afghan central bank. Would the deal be, hey, we'll release this money if you participate in this blockade against the Iranian government? You don't like them either. We get you don't like us, but we're not on your border. The Iranians are, and we no longer have a presence in your country, but the Iranians could. So maybe that's the calculus. Would the Taliban go along with it? Again, I don't think so. That's one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical of this idea, because there's a lot for nations to lose, the nations that surround Iran, to go along with this. There's other factors to consider. As I mentioned, Russia will put pressure on Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan not to accept the deal. I think accepting this kind of going along with something like this would be very unpopular in these countries, especially Afghanistan. Again, like, the United States government isn't exactly a very popular entity within Afghanistan. We just fought a war against each other. Why would we be? We didn't shake hands and hug at the end of it. There was a very tenuous peace at the end where they let us withdraw, but still there's no love lost between our two factions. Pakistan, I don't think Pakistan would go along with this as well. There's quite a bit of positive sentiment towards the Palestinian cause within Pakistan. Pakistan is a fellow Muslim country. I don't think a move like this would be very popular for the Pakistani government. Not that that's ever stopped them before, but I'm not entirely sure if this is something they would want to get involved in, especially with other nations being involved in this, their participation being something that's unlikely or just up in the air. So unless everyone else signed on for it, rather, fairly consequence-free, and this actually worked, I think maybe at that point Pakistan would sign up. But overall, I don't think that they want to get themselves involved again and doing something which is seen being done at the behest of Israel and the United States, especially Israel. So no, to sum things up, I don't think that this idea is going to bear any kind of fruit. I don't even know how true it is. This might just be a rumor, but like, on paper, is this a good idea? Like, strategically, I guess, would this be the right move if you wanted to put maximum economic pressure on Iran? Absolutely, sure. It would completely cut them off from global commerce. The strait isn't being used, which means nothing is going in and out. Pakistan, their navy could blockade the Gulf of Oman. Sure, that would work. Nothing could get through Afghanistan and make its way to China. Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan going along with this could prevent trade with Russia, not necessarily Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, but I think the main issue here is trying to cut off Russian trade. This Iraq engaging in a blockade would keep any aid from well, any trade from making its way to Lebanon, um, to help out Hezbollah. Turkey, same thing. This would prevent. Um, I don't know how much trade is actually done with Turkey, so I'm not going to say. But I understand the strategy here. Yes, this is a valid strategical move. I just don't think any country that this is being proposed to is going to go along with it for the reasons that I just mentioned. So, right idea, I suppose, but I don't think anyone is going to go along with it, which means the war is going to continue as is for the time being. Keep in mind, the United States needs to find a way to end this quickly. Um, the U.S. president needs to save face as best he can. If he completely withdraws from the situation, he's going to be seen as weak. Uh, President Trump's entire foreign policy strategy is to make the United States appear as strong as possible so it can use the threat of violence for maximum leverage. If the U.S. is seen to be tucking tail and running, well, that undermines his entire foreign policy philosophy. But the United States is also in a situation where it doesn't seem to have a real strategy to end this war quickly. And all the Iranians really need to do is to hold on as long as possible. They don't need to launch any kind of grand offensive. They don't need to launch massive amounts of airstrikes against targets in the region. Yes, they'll occasionally target U.S. bases and infrastructure in Gulf countries, which they did successfully strike a base in Jordan. There is no grand offensive that needs to take place. They can conserve much of their military strength while simply just trying to hold the straits right here. So the U.S. needs to find a way to bring them to the table. And at the moment, the Iranians are kind of content to just keep the status quo going for as long as they can. So I guess we'll see what the next set of proposals is. I can't really think of a good way for the United States to end this war quickly. As I mentioned in previous videos, a ground invasion, I think it's off the table. There's no good staging areas for that. I don't see a seaborne invasion being something that is possible. And I don't see airstrikes being something that can effectively bring the Iranians to the table. So I think the lesson here is, if a war is to be prosecuted, it needs to be a war that can be ended quickly. Especially if it's a situation that where the least ideal scenario coming out of it would be a long war of attrition. I think that whatever plan the Israelis and the United States had going into this clearly didn't work as intended. So now they're sort of stuck in a situation where there's no good way to end the war quickly, but yet the war must be ended as quickly as possible. But anyways, that's my analysis of this situation. I guess we'll see what the parties involved decide to do next. I'll keep an eye on it, and I'll be back with more videos as further developments take place. But anyways, I hope everyone out there enjoyed this content. If you did, please drop me a like, consider subscribing to my channel, and hit the bell button for notifications. And I hope everyone out there has a great rest of your week and enjoy your weekend.